Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Darkside Phil here, doing a live review. I'm actually live on stream right now, but recording this for YouTube as well, of Detroit Become Human, the latest installment of an episodic kind of choose-your-own-adventure style game from Quantic Dream in the mind of David Cage. Now, full disclosure, I have played many of these games in the past, including Indigo Prophecy / Fahrenheit, as well as Heavy Rain, which actually, way back when it was a new release, was one of my biggest playthroughs ever, and I had the biggest playthrough of that game at the time on the internet. That was hugely popular on YouTube. It gave me some of my initial popularity when I was becoming virally popular as a Let's Player. Years later, played Beyond Two Souls, which I did really enjoy, but didn't feel like it was as good as the previous games that Quantic Dream had put out. And now we've got the latest one, Detroit Become Human, here in 2018. Much like Quantic Dream's previous outings, Detroit Become Human is a choose-your-own-adventure style game. This time around, there are three main protagonists, and we're living in the futuristic world of Detroit, Michigan, which is an actual real city in Michigan in the United States, in the year 2038. So 20 years in the future. What has happened? Well, some technology has advanced, some not so much. And it's kind of interesting in this game how some things look kind of old rundown cars and houses, but some things are very futuristic for those who have the money for it. You know, there's new futuristic self-driving cars, new kinds of billboards and the like. And androids have now become commonplace in American society. For the low price of $7,000, you can have an android that will do your every whim, do your chores, you know, do heavy work around the house, drive you around, carry you around, protect, raise your kids. Hell, in the world of Detroit, they even have the military. They say 2/3 of the military have become androids, okay? So a pretty interesting premise, and what happens in the game is this is the beginning of the android revolution. Androids are basically being treated like property and treated as, possessions, and basically being mistreated by humans to the point where some androids start to become self-aware and realize that obeying their programming is not in their own self-interest. They become sentient beings, and now they're striking back against the humans, and it's ultimately your decisions over the course of Detroit Become Human that determine what's going to happen in the plot line of the game. So, there are three main protagonists in the game. There's Marcus, who is the android that starts the revolution. He's the one who realizes, he gets self-aware and says, man, we got to do something for ourselves. We have to make the humans know that we are alive and we want rights, okay? And you have choices over the course of the game to either be a non-violent or violent kind of an uprising against the humans. There is Connor, who works for the company CyberLife, who invented all of these androids. He is the investigative detective. He is the android partnering with a human partner named Hank for the Detroit PD to investigate what's going on with these androids, which they have deemed deviant, meaning androids that are not thinking in their right mind, the code is glitched or something, and basically they're going off doing these things, becoming self-aware. They're not supposed to do that, so it's up to Connor and Hank to try to figure out what exactly is going on in that regard, and either determine whether or not you want to solve the problem or maybe even become part of it, okay? And then you've got Kara, who is an android that looks like a human. She's meant to be a kind of almost a nanny android, but when things go wrong at home, it's up to her to ultimately decide, is she going to break free of her confines of her code, go against it to protect a little girl who's being abused by her father. And again, ultimately, your choices in the game determine what happens to these characters. Kara ends up being a fugitive on the run, trying to find some place to go with this girl, and you have various things that you can do during the course of the game that will change up the formula of how things go. Do you want to hide out in a garage where no one will know that you're there, but you're having a tough time, and maybe the girl will get sick because you're sleeping in a shitty, wet garage overnight? Or do you want to go hold up a convenience store to get money so you can go spend the night at the motel where the girl will be healthier? But then what's going to happen? Are people going to know that you're there? Are the cops going to get wind of where you are? And it's these kind of choices that ultimately make this game an awesome, out-branching path kind of game. Now, for the most part, the game's characters, three main protagonists, are completely independent from each other until about the final 2 hours of the game. FYI, a typical run-through of Detroit Become Human, roughly around 10 hours, I would say. I think my first run took about 11, but then I did a second run that only took about 8, okay? So it all depends on your choices. It also depends on who you keep alive, because much like Heavy Rain and other previous Quantic Dream outings, depending on the choices you make in the game, your characters may live or die. They may end up in one scenario where things are great, in another scenario they're out of the story permanently till the end of the game, and now several cutscenes are missing, and several, story segments are missing for the rest of the game. The gameplay itself primarily consists of two main things. Number one, just making dialogue choices. Do you want to be violent or do you want to be pacifist? Boink, you make your choice. it pans out and you see what happens. The other are quick time events, okay? Dialogue choices primarily are going to formulate the way that the story folds out for each of the three protagonists and choose, oh, do you want to go this way or this way? Do you want to be, do you want to work for Cyber Life and do what they say, or do you want to venture out and maybe not do what they say? Do you want to be, violent, or do you want to be pacifist, okay? But the quick time events also are pretty important. Usually during a quick time event segment, which is usually a combat segment or maybe action where you're on the run, someone's chasing you, you're trying to escape, you can usually mess up the quick time a couple times with no negative repercussions. But for the most part, if you fuck up a quick time event badly, that could lead to your character actually dying several different points during the course of the story. Finally, near the end of the game, all of the characters do intersect and their stories do kind of intertwine temporarily. In particular, it's actually the stories of Connor and Marcus that intertwine well at the end of the game. Kara, even though she does run into them, it's not necessarily as big of an interaction, okay? And just so you guys know, I did 2 full playthroughs of the game. All right. The first, I was just doing, different kinds of choices. And by the end of the game, 1 of the characters had died, 2 of them survived. The 2 that survived had a pretty happy ending. But the one that died, sadly, had a really shitty ending, okay? My second run-through of the game, I tried to do completely alternate choices, and it flipped the whole plot on its head. In this ending, 1 of the characters that had died in my first playthrough survived. 1 of the characters that had survived my first playthrough died this time. And this third character had a completely different ending than they had in the original playthrough. So, just some example, 2 playthroughs, totally different outcomes, all right? Now, the cool thing about Detroit Become Human, which is something that the previous games from Quantic Dream doesn't do, is that every single major scene in the game has what's called a timeline, a flow chart, by which you can track the choices you've made and see the different various outcomes that can actually splinter off based on these different decisions and choices that you do during the gameplay. And once you've completed the game, you now have the ability to go back into the entirety of the flowcharts of the game and reload checkpoints and try them out from the opposite route to see what happens. I mean, some of these things branch so much, you could maybe play the game through 3, 4, 5 times and still not see every single possible outcome that could happen in the game, and that's really awesome. Some people say, well, this game's short, 10 hours, that's not worth my hard-earned dollar, right? But some people say, well, you know what? If you actually are going to get your money's worth, you want to go back and replay the game and get all the different various outcomes that could come out of it. And you could upwards play 20, 30 hours just replaying the game over and over. However, I will forewarn everyone. The first playthrough of this game is great. You don't know what's coming. It's interesting, it's fun, and by the end of the game, wow, that was a refreshing, interesting story. In fact, in my opinion, one of the best stories in a video game in quite some time. But when you go back for your repeated playthrough, sadly, the amount of interest will diminish greatly. All right? And what I mean by that is, significantly, there will be about, your interest will diminish because there's a lot of scenes in this game that are exactly the same. Like, there's no way to get around them. They're going to be the same no matter what. And that being said, do you want to really replay the game and have to do this same scene that's 5, 10, 15 minutes over and over and over in every playthrough? That's a little annoying, okay? So, for my second run, even though I enjoyed my second run, I did find myself rushing through certain segments where I knew I couldn't really make different choices. I knew if I made a different choice, this character will die. I don't want the character to die here. I want them to survive to see their ending. So I had to just kind of rush through this segment, rush through it. And that's, like I said, my first playthrough was around 11 hours. My second playthrough was only around maybe 8 to 8.5 because I knew there were certain segments I didn't care about grabbing a magazine collectible and reading it. You know what I mean? I didn't care about hearing the dialogue options. I'd already heard them before. So, all that being said, Detroit Become Human is a very fun game. I'll say, here, let's go positives and negatives for this review. Positives of the game, great graphics. Just like with all these Quantic Dream games, they did full, facial scans, and you could tell they did great mocap work. The characters feel natural for the most part. There are a few segments I would say the characters do look a little odd, but for the most part, the mocap and everything is great. Some of the people who they got to do the roles in this game are real-life actors. In fact, Marcus himself is a very prominent actor, I guess, who was known from the series Grey's Anatomy. I don't know because I never saw the show, but apparently he's like one of the leads in that show, and so he's one of the main 3 protagonists. The girl Kara is one of the leads from the show The Following from a few years back. It was that cult. It was about a cult, and it started had like Kevin Bacon in it, so I recognized her right away. And also the supporting cast, the guy who plays Hank the detective for the Detroit PD is someone who's played so many numerous roles in movies over the years. He was the voice of Lex Luthor and also the voice of Neo Cortex for various other projects. So pretty prominent people, and the overall when you're playing the game, it really does feel like you're doing a really high quality Hollywood style interactive movie. You're controlling a Hollywood movie is kind of how I feel. It really is really well designed and well shot and well implemented plot lines, dialogue, and drama. All right. And I do like the fact there's 3 main protagonists instead of just one like there was in Beyond Two Souls, which was one of the main criticisms the game had. Now that there's 3 protagonists, you have more to mess with, more things to determine, and it keeps it fresh. If you were just always one character constantly, it would kind of get burnt out and tired. But the fact that you're alternating between 3 characters within this game keeps it fresh, and it never feels like one character wears out their welcome, you know what I mean? Because you're constantly only doing things with one character, and that's a really good thing. And I also like the flowchart aspect of the game, that not only can you see, oh, these are the choices I made, but look at all these other optional things that are available, but also the fact that you can reload checkpoints during the flowchart is great. For someone who likes this kind of game, a choose-your-own-adventure style game, you're going to want to be able to go back and resume and not have to replay the game from the start, right? You want to be able to, in Chapter 3, there was this critical choice. What happens if I do the other one and I continue my story from there? You could just do that rather than have to replay the entire game from the start and wait 2.5 hours to get to the point where you wanted to do your alternate choice. That's really well designed, all right? The game does also have a lot of unlockables, FYI. You earn points for the choices you make in the game. And if you replay the game once or twice, you get a ton of points where you can unlock all kinds of optional stuff, like the character models, music of the game, some videos and cutscenes from the game, that kind of stuff, which is pretty cool. But now let's talk negatives, all right? Real talk. Number 1, the gameplay of Detroit Become Human is incredibly simplistic. Even a child can do it. You don't need any kind of real skill to play Detroit Become Human. In fact, the only challenge there really is the QuickTime event. You have to be on the ball to hit the buttons properly, but as long as you're used to using a PlayStation 4 controller, you shouldn't have too much problem with it. Like I said, I really didn't have anyone die or fail because of a QuickTime event during my playthroughs, unless it was intentional, okay? It was actually a dialogue choice that I made that was bad that led to a character dying that I didn't intend on. So the QuickTime events, even though they're there, there's not that much challenge to it. The game is pretty much easy. It really is. You're watching a movie and I choose, I want to see this outcome. I wonder what happens. Okay, go back. I want to choose and see this outcome. And that's all it is. It's not a challenging game by any means. Some people are very critical of these games. Some people aren't. I'm kind of middle of the road. Do I desire that there should be more after, playing so many Quantic Dream games? Yeah, I'll be honest. I wish there was more gameplay elements to the game, and I wish that there was more challenge to it. It is a plus that the game has investigation aspects with Connor and Hank, the detective duo, because they're looking into like murders and stuff, and so it's almost like playing LA Noire where you're looking for clues and the like. At the same time, even that's incredibly simplistic to the point where I do wish there were more gameplay elements and or maybe a little bit more of an element of challenge to the game. But outside of that, the game's super easy, and yeah, a lot of people would probably say that's a negative. It's too easy. There's not enough challenge. Number 2, replayability. If you really like the story and the characters, there's massive replayability. If you don't like the story of the characters, this game's terrible, right? Imagine that. Imagine if you don't like the writing of the game, you don't like the plot line of androids being oppressed. And yes, there's going to be tons of allegories and comparisons driven to other things in human history when civil rights were challenged. African Americans who were treated as a completely different race or completely different species from people of other colored skin, in particular whites, where they were segregated and everything. Huge comparisons there. Androids standing at the back of the bus, literally, like Rosa Parks. Other comparison, when Kara's being persecuted and threatened to be arrested and maybe sent to like a concentration camp for androids. Obviously, that's drawing comparisons to World War II and the Nazis. So a lot of these things exist in the game, and a lot of people think, it's too close to things we've seen a million times. We've seen the Nazi story a million times. We've seen the story about, African Americans being treated badly after slavery ended a million times. And we're just so tired with this, okay? That this is a tired story and we don't need it. I saw that criticism. I'll be honest with you guys. I've never played a video game in my life that handled a situation like this as seriously as this game does. Yes, there have been the ideas of, second-class citizens, segregation and stuff in other games I've played. A perfect example here would be Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Just, what was that, last year or the year before? Where that game, the whole backdrop of the game is that androids were distrusted by humanity, so anyone who had these implants or whatever became kind of a segregated citizen. But that wasn't the primary focus of the game. In this game, that's the whole focus of the game. You see what I mean? So if you like that kind of deal, wow, it's the first time we're ever taking this seriously in a video game, you'll probably like it. But a lot of people I saw who criticized the game very harshly were like, well, it's too heavy-handed, and it's not, we want nuance. Why is there no nuance in the plot of the game? To which I respond, listen, I judge things on face value. I played the game. I liked it. I didn't feel that it was too heavy-handed. I didn't feel that it was too forced. Yes, there were direct comparisons, like the android standing at the back of the bus, but they were trying to make a point and understand why a race, because that's really what it is, it's these race of creatures, could be mistreated and how they would rise up against this oppression that they're having, right? I liked it, but some people didn't like the plot. Personally, I enjoyed it, all right? And that's just coming from me. Maybe if you're not like me, you'll hate it. I thought it was really entertaining, okay? The one negative, definitely, I did notice in certain scenes, like, I'll give you an example. Some choices that you make with one of the characters determines pacifist or violent, okay, when you're doing your uprising for these androids. Well, there's one or two characters that will either like you or dislike you, depending on if you're a pacifist or you're actually, like, a violent, you know? So, I'm violent, one character likes you, the other one dislikes you. I've noticed there'll be, all of a sudden, right in the middle of dialogue, it'll cut to, like, an alternate dialogue where someone's angry at you because you did something naughty. Then it goes back to the normal dialogue like everything's fine and they're not mad at you anymore. And I've noticed that. I think they had a hard time getting the transitions between, I disapprove of what you're doing, but I'm going to keep going along with the plot anyway. So there are some scenes that are kind of jarring in that regard. And I do feel that they definitely could have done a little bit of a better job getting those scenes kind of wedged in and seeing less jarring and out of place, which a few of the times they do. Okay. However, one of the best things about this game, it doesn't lie to you. Like, Telltale Games from Telltale, the game developer, a lot of the times they say, every choice matters. You make all these choices, none of them matter, right? At the end of the game, it's the same outcome no matter what. In this game, you could definitively have your characters die multiple times during the game. You could have completely different outcomes. I know, because I saw completely different outcomes for all three characters for the 2 times that I played through the game, and that was really cool. But it should be said as a negative, yes, there are kind of silly, superfluous choices that give you the illusion of choice, but no matter what you choose, you're going to get the same outcome anyway. So it's going to be a mixed bag. Some stuff means something, some stuff doesn't, but there is enough in there that does mean something to me that the game actually was worth playing, and I thought it was very enjoyable, okay? Now, the final criticism I'll give the game is that 2 of the characters in the game are incredibly important. 1 is not. Okay, 2 of the characters are you're going to interact in a big way at the end of the game, and depending on your choices, could completely change the outcome. 1 character of the 3 main protagonists could literally never exist, and it wouldn't have affected the plot at all. And I almost feel like maybe that character could have been wedged in for more variety. Maybe they were originally just going to have the game with 2 characters. They said, but we want more variety, so wedge a 3rd character in there, and then they try to find a way to get this character to mesh in with the story last minute. And I do agree there that I do feel that 3rd character should have had a better story. I didn't like it was like almost like, if you remember when I played Heavy Rain, and Heavy Rain had a couple scenes for certain characters that didn't seem to make sense. Like, remember Norman Jayden, the investigative FBI agent, all of a sudden is going to investigate something at, like, a car garage, and he gets into a fight with a convict, and by the time the scene's over, it didn't add anything to the game. It was just an added scene for Norman Jayden. That's kind of what one character's entire story is like. Like, it really doesn't matter, and it just feels like it's wedged in to have extra scenes in the game. Maybe they wanted to pad the length a little bit because they felt if there was only 2 characters, the game would only be like 8 hours long, and that's not long enough. I don't know. So the game does have some negatives, but it does have a lot of positives as well, all right? So for me, ultimately, there's 2 things you're going to want to know. What do I think about this compared to other games from Quantic Dream, okay? And what's my review score? Compared to the other games that I played from Quantic Dream, I will tell you, I liked Detroit Become Human more than Indigo Prophecy / Fahrenheit, whatever you want to call it. And I liked it more than Beyond Two Souls. I think the game's plot is more interesting. The 3 protagonists make it better in that regard. And essentially, this is like the most modernized and best version, kind of, what's the word? The epitome of what a choose-your-own-adventure game should be. Great graphics, responsive controls, a good cast of characters, great music, a plotline that changes, your choices actually do matter in most cases, and a flowchart that allows you to go back and resume and do alternate choices without replaying the entire game from the start. That's great. But I do have to say, overall, thinking back to all the games that I've played of this style, I still think overall I liked Heavy Rain a little bit better than Detroit Become Human, primarily because Heavy Rain was a murder mystery. Okay? When you have a murder mystery, you're constantly trying to think about things from the scenes and put them together, two and two together. You're basically become a detective yourself trying to figure out the mystery. Who's the killer? Who's doing what? In Detroit Become Human, none of that exists. There are a few mysteries that present themselves over the course of the game, and sadly, when you get your answers to some of these mysteries, they're very deflating. And there's one mystery today, when I was doing my alternate choices run, I definitively asked someone in the game who has the answer, what is this? And when he answered, I was like, that's lame. I waited the whole game to find out what this is, and it's just something stupid, and it was almost esoteric, and it had nothing to do with the plot of the game, and I was like, it's kind of deflating. In Heavy Rain, you're constantly asking, gee, what is who's the murderer? What's going on? I like the plot of Heavy Rain slightly better than the plot of Detroit Become Human, but Detroit by far has better gameplay, more modernizations, better graphics, but everything about, hey, most of the characters in the game actually sound like they're speaking English. Heavy Rain, half the characters sounded French. So, you see what I mean? There's positives and negatives. But overall, I do think I like Heavy Rain slightly better. That doesn't mean Detroit's a bad game. It just means that Detroit didn't have that kind of style of plot that I enjoy a little bit more. So I will say, Detroit Become Human is a great game. If you like this choose-your-own-adventure style game, you're absolutely going to enjoy it. Considering the fact that 2018 has been a pretty dry gaming year, this is definitely one of the best games I've played this year, alongside other games like God of War. I'm going to give Detroit Become Human an 8.5 out of 10. I actually liked it that much. Is it Game of the Year material? I wanted a little bit more from the game. I definitely would have liked that one protagonist to have more of an important role in the story. Maybe a little bit more implementation of a different kind of gameplay element. All right. But outside of that, I did like the game 8.5 out of 10. The final thing I'd like to say, okay? The absolute final thing that I would like to say, all right? How can this kind of game be improved upon? All right? Here's my answer to that. Imagine Heavy Rain. That kind of game. Murder mystery, choose your own adventure. You got multiple protagonists, right? All different characters you control. But, dependent on your choices, the actual murderer and or mystery behind the murder changes. Imagine if how you play the game actually changes the plot completely. So in one scenario, this person was the murderer. In another scenario, another person was the murderer. See what I mean? It keeps you guessing, and maybe because your choices will change the game, you'll find different clues and things. The best comparison I can make for this, if anyone ever saw the movie Clue, it's from the 1980s. Many of you probably didn't see it. It's mostly a comedy, but it is a murder mystery as well. That movie has 3 endings in the same movie. It gives you one ending, then it says, oh, well, what if this was the ending instead? And then it goes back about 20 minutes into the end of the movie and replays the events to show you an alternate scenario of different things that happened, and a different person was the murderer. That would be amazing for a choose-your-own-adventure style game. Imagine that. A game has completely different scenarios that change on the fly because you made different choices. I would love that. And we haven't seen anything like that yet. You know what I mean? That would be a lot of work, for sure, for a game dev to pull off. But if they did that, that could be like the quintessential final level of what a choose-your-own-adventure game can do. And I would like to see that in the future. I think, honestly, that's really one of the only main ways that, say, Quantic Dream could put out a better game than what they did with Detroit Become Human, because it really is, like, the best of what I would expect from that style of game. All right? So, Detroit Become Human, a great game, one of my favorite picks of 2018 so far. Love the story, definitely worth a few run-throughs. You'll get at least 10 hours of gameplay out of it in one run. You'll probably get almost 20 hours of gameplay if you play it twice. Yes, your choices actually matter. Great cast, good plot, has a few drawbacks, which I mentioned, but for the most part, a heavily enjoyable experience. 8.5 out of 10 for me. All right, guys, that's my review of a Detroit Become Human. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the future. Peace out.